Okay, it's Paul Green here from the business community. We're doing another one of our regular spotlight on interviews where we get to learn a little bit about another small business owner and pick their brains about their expertise. So I'm glad to say I'm joined this morning by Daishik Chauhan. Good morning, Daishik.
Morning, Paul. How are you?
Not too bad. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and what your business is about, just by way of an introduction for people that might not know you.
Okay, sure. My name is Daishik Chauhan. I founded a company called Cruises Consulting Limited, which is essentially a business started out as me contracting myself out as a software developer. But alongside that, I'm also trying to get into smaller businesses and help them solve their software related issues, essentially things to do with data management, handling data imports or exports. And that's kind of the core purpose of my business.
Okay. So I know from previous conversations that you're from Zimbabwe. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of a sort of snapshot history of how you started there and have ended up in the UK.
Okay, actually the story goes back a little bit further than that. I was actually born in India, and but my mum was born in Zimbabwe, and various reasons they basically ended up settling, my dad and my mum. My dad's from India, and they settled in Rhodesia. And I was there, obviously, growing up in Rhodesia, and then the change from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. Continued my education in Zimbabwe, went to university. I did a degree there, and after finishing my degree and having worked for a couple of years, I took advantage of something called a working holiday, which is offered to Commonwealth citizens to come to work in the UK. And I took that up, and I was here for about a year and a half doing odd jobs in the IT sort of space. And I met my wife after about 18 or 19 months. And yeah, as they say, is how I ended up becoming a resident and then eventually becoming a citizen.
Excellent, excellent. So software is obviously your passion. I guess that's what you studied at university.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I never set out to get into the software business.
Oh, okay.
Or even becoming a software developer. In fact, I don't think I was even particularly interested in it, even though I recall being reasonably good at it in those sort of modules which I did for my engineering degree course. But it turns out that I was rather interested in solving problems and in breaking them down, coming up with solutions, and that works out reasonably well in most technical subjects, including engineering. So after I left university, in fact, even before that, I was working for an IT company, and that was basically involving setting solutions for various, and interested in software. After I moved to this country, that I was a bank and for a luckily no experience, and ended up thinking that, well, this ultimately catapulted into user interfaces, data management. I took to it like a duck, so it stuck with me now. I've been doing so coming up to 20 years.
Okay. So obviously you've created your own business now, sort of focusing on software support for. So who is a sort of ideal client for you, Daishik? Who do you ideally like to work with and work your software magic?
I essentially want to work in the services sector. There's a sort of is sort of like between 50, 60 users office who have software needs, which sometimes just shift outside of the stuff you can get off the shelf or as a software as a service in the cloud. And those sort of customers typically either find workarounds, which are usually inefficient, or they kind of live with the problem and make it a manual paperwork sort of exercise. And I think that sort of the client works really well for me, because I can go in there, talk to them, get requirements, and generally speaking, I can work with them with their existing systems without having to throw everything out of the boat and start again, and develop small solutions for them which sort of complement what they already have.
Okay. So I've taken advantage of software. I've got my own bespoke CRM system now, and certainly from my point of view, it's saved oodles and oodles of time, because a lot of what the software has absorbed is some of the administrative functions that software can quite cleverly integrate and automate and make things a lot smoother. So if someone is looking to sort of invest in software, what would your recommendations be? Where should they sort of start? Because I guess you've got the off the shelf, you've got the bespoke solutions, I guess you've got hybrids in between. What would you say is the place for a business to start?
I think the first step is always to research what's already on the market. So it's prepackaged software or software as a service. Those sort of options will always be cheaper, simply because you have a monthly subscription, the software's already been developed, and the support is already in place for that. Any bugs in the software have either already been identified and fixed, or if they are identified, it's going to be a problem shared amongst lots of different subscribers to that software or users of that software. And there's I guess there's a greater chance that those bugs will be found and fixed quickly. So the first port of call will always be go to do your research and see whether there's something else already out there which will do the job. If you find something which doesn't quite work for you, then you can start looking at whether there's a customization for the closest matching software. So, for example, if you're using, let's just say, for argument's sake, that you're building a website in WordPress. That's not my forte, but say you were. So typically, the basic WordPress platform doesn't do everything, but what WordPress does come with is loads and loads of bolt-ons and snap-ins, which you can actually install on your WordPress solution and get that functionality. So that's the next port of call. See whether there is something out there which will integrate with the existing system, because that will typically also be supported by the software vendor and will have a large usage. And thirdly, then, if either of those two things don't work for you, then you can start thinking about bespoke software. But you need to be very clear as to what it is that you want your bespoke software to do. And one of the things I'll be talking about a little bit later is how you go about working that out.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, because what I found is as my business developed, when I started off running networking groups, it was just the one group with 30 or 40 people, and it was just sort of like emails back and forth and spreadsheets, sort of simple thing. Then as it got bigger, I sort of moved on to platforms like Eventbrite to manage that for me. And then as Eventbrite didn't quite cut it, as you touched on earlier, I had a WordPress website at the time, and I just looked at an event management system there. But what I found is it got so many bells and whistles, because I think the problem with some of the off-the-shelf stuff is they try and incorporate so much. It's a bit like Word on your computer. You've got so many functions, and people probably use about 10% of those functions. And then there's quite a lot of unique elements to the way I was running the networking and the different things I was doing, that I just felt the only way forward really was to have something designed that worked like my business did. And that's had, as I said, massive advantages. The most difficult thing I found was actually specifying the software. I don't know whether you come across that or what your advice to people is, or whether you're going to cover it later.
I'm going to cover it later, actually.
Oh, okay. We'll look at that later. Yeah, because it must have taken me a while to sort of get my head around how can I put something on paper that a software developer is going to understand, and develop a piece of software out of it. So I had to be quite a discipline. You know, I literally had to sort of lock myself away for almost like 2 days and just do it, and refine it. And you know, I did a bit geeky myself, so I did a few flow charts. I thought software developers will love those sort of flow chart type things. So I knocked up a few of those, which helped, I think. So we eventually got there. So I often sort of like ask people on these calls, you know, what's your why? What is it that sort of drives you, gets you out of bed in the morning? What would you say that is for you?
For me, the why comes from seeing problem solved, bringing clients confidence that they can move on from the issues that's blocking them or causing them difficulties. So my way of working is to work with clients. Like you're saying, you shut yourself off in over several days, presumably writing these specifications. My approach is to work with the clients to identify the problems and present them with a suitable roadmap or strategy to work through the issues, because it doesn't always have to be a software solution. You know, for every line of code you write, you've got the potential of introducing a bug. So you just write the code which you absolutely need. That's kind of the way I work. And it doesn't always have to be new software. It could mean using existing software or systems in more effective ways. One of the customers I spoke to had already bought software and didn't know that the software they'd bought did some of the functionality which they were asking for. So that sometimes happens. Cutting waste resource usage if they've got resources in the cloud. Or optimizing their existing systems. So like the database queries might be running slow. So there's things which can be done about that. So as I explained in the talk, which I'm going to do in a little while, is I'm not really interested in revolutionizing anyone's business. I believe in simplicity and incremental, gradual changes wherever possible. So I try to help businesses merge software and technology into the operational sort of landscape. And so it's not about something that they necessarily need to splurge out huge amounts of money on, you know, every few years and then forget about it. It's an ongoing thing, and I think it needs to be dealt with as an operational cost rather than you know, a big investment, which you know, they spend tens of thousands of pounds in one go and then think, well, that's done now.
Yeah. So technology is an ever-changing goalpost, as I'm sure you've experienced, and you know the cloud seems to be the word of the moment, or certainly in recent years. So what's your view on that? How has software evolved, and how have you seen it? You know, are people still using office-based server software, or are pretty much most people looking to sort of like move into the cloud?
I think there's I guess there's two ways of looking at it. There are some clients who really want to maintain control over their own infrastructure, either because they're concerned about security, or they just like the idea of having their data and their applications on premises, or at the very least in a data center which they have ready access to. The cloud is, or can be, quite anonymous, because it really is just rented space in a data center, which, you know, could be anywhere really. But when people do go to the cloud, what they do get is the idea that you've got this huge amount of resource, both in terms of computation, but also storage, which they don't need to think about in terms of individual servers or individual pieces of infrastructure. And that can free up some businesses and give them a sense of liberation from having to worry about those sort of things, particularly when it comes to things like patching servers, or you know, worrying about the security updates and the configuration of their firewalls and what have you. So those sort of things can make a difference to some organizations where they have a huge operational cost on the infrastructure side of things.
Absolutely. The other aspect that, again, is becoming more and more in the news is security and cybercrime. So as a developer, is that something that, you know, you've always been conscious of, or is it something now that you're more conscious of in terms of, you know, making any software development that you do, you know, less hackable or unhackable?
It's something which has always been there, but yeah, you're right. It has come to the fore because there's been a lot of highly publicized security breaches in recent years, and people's expectation of privacy and data security has gone up as well. So there are a lot of steps that can be taken as part of the software development process to mitigate a lot of the risks. Some of them have been around for a long time, and some of them are as part of this. I guess it's a phrase that just left me, but it's basically it's a vicious circle. So the more the software developers and the IT experts beef up security, the more their incentive there is for the cyber criminals to up their ante and develop tools to circumvent those. So it's an arms race. That's the phrase I was looking for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, I've seen various documents, lists of various podcasts. Do you think that small business owners right now don't think that they're likely to be affected by cybercrime, and they think it's the bigger organizations? And what would you say to that?
I think because there are far greater numbers of smaller businesses, statistically, I guess, the likelihood of one individual business being hit by a ransomware attack or some sort of hacking incident are quite low as an individual small business. But the number of small businesses which do get hacked is actually quite high. I think the last figure I saw, it was around 30-something%. So it's not insignificant. And also the other issue is that smaller businesses typically do have less security. They commonly can't afford their own security experts and somebody watching their IT systems like a hawk day and night, and making all the sort of adjustments and configuration changes which are necessary to keep the attackers at bay. So they're an easy target from that respect. And I think that sort of complacency is probably not a good idea, because chances are that if a large organization gets hit, then they've got the staff on hand to help bring the systems back up, and they'll suffer reputational damage, but they're more likely to recover. Whereas an attack on a small business, it's quite likely to be terminal.
Yeah, absolutely. They're less able to respond, I guess, at the end of the day, aren't they? As you said, they might not have a separate IT department. They're going to have to rely on a sort of outsourcing that type of thing just to overcome, and it can be quite difficult. I mean, I think I saw a stat the other day actually that said like 68% of small businesses in the UK have already been compromised, but it takes 237 days on average for them to find out before it actually comes to fruition. And they find out that the software's failing, or there's a hacker inside and has done something devastating like deleted your data. And I also know the stats on recovery of small businesses that have a disaster like that, I think less than 50% actually recover from something. So it's important to take a look at. So there's a number of software developers out there, Daishik. What do you think makes you different from your competitors, would you say?
Well, I think the first thing is I'm personally interested in solving the problems. So I bring a personal interest and interaction to the way I do business. I make it perfectly clear I'm not actually selling technology or even necessarily the software. So I believe I'm solving the problem, and I try and build a relationship in that respect with owner managers and staff as well in those organizations. So the proposals I make and solutions I offer are a good fit all around for managers and for staff. I also do my utmost to explain what I'm doing and why, without jargon, and especially when I'm dealing with non-technical people. And the other thing, which I think is a little bit different, which I was surprised about when I first started to talk to small businesses, is that I seem to operate in a slight niche in the technical stack in which I work. So most small businesses tend to work around WordPress and the languages and databases which surround that sort of platform, whereas I focus almost exclusively on the Microsoft stack. So Windows Desktop, Server, and Azure for the cloud platform. But just to be clear, it's web applications written on the Microsoft stack are still accessible and interoperable with with any non-Microsoft devices and software be it Apple or Linux. But so those are the kind of two things which make me slightly different in the small business space.
Excellent. I mean, certainly with any industry, you get the 3-letter acronyms and the 4-letter acronyms that people don't necessarily understand what that means. It can be a little bit of a minefield for people out there. So yeah, if you're bringing it down to a layperson's terms, so they can understand, what those things mean. Because ultimately, like you say, if you're solving a problem, the methodology necessarily in the software doesn't really matter, as long as you're going to provide a solution for that person that overcomes whatever issue they might be facing. So how do you typically engage with people then? What's your sort of process if you had an inquiry? How do you tend to work with them?
So the first thing I do is do like a broad software audit or review, see what they have, what they're using, how they're using it. And what sometimes happens is that, like I said earlier, they've got the software already, but they're just not using it in the way that brings the most out of it. The other thing is then once we've been through that sort of exercise, and we can then talk about the actual shortcomings in the software, which definitely aren't served by what's available to them, what they currently have. And then we can start talking about how we go about solving those sort of problems, because sometimes it could be a solution-based approach to solving the problem. So one of the things I recently proposed to a client was they wanted to import a certain amount of data every day, and it was taking one of their staff around an hour and a half every day to bring this data into their system. And the simplest solution really was to make use of the tools built within SQL Server to do it. That didn't involve any programming at all, or software packages. It literally just using the tool set which was currently there. So those sort of things are available, and it's only when those are exhausted, or if they've got a good reason not to use those tools, because they specifically want a software package, or they specifically want to use it in a very specific way, then we can start talking about the kind of software that they want to have, and that can go into all sorts of directions. Do they want something which runs on the server? Do they want something which the clients can have buttons and user interfaces to click on, or do they want an API? Or those sort of discussions can take place from there, and go for there.
And how would, let's say, for example, if I'm in a business, working with a business from the point of view of like a business advisor, business coach, how might I identify or notice that they might need somebody like your help? How would that sort of show up, would you say, for people that are working with your potential prospects? What might they see?
Okay, so I think I've already said the kind of business. So if it's service industry or service sector, and they've got that sort of sweet spot size of between 10 and say 60 users in their business. So that's the first thing. And then the second one is if they're clear that they want bespoke software, or they just want to discuss whether they need it. So that's one thing. And then if they do want bespoke software, then it's also the kind of tools or software they're looking for, because some companies are already invested in the Microsoft ecosystem. And it makes sense then for them to stay with that, especially if they've got Windows Service, for example, or they've already got some applications hosted on Azure, for them to stay with it. The second thing is that if they haven't invested in the Microsoft ecosystem and they've already got applications, say on a different platform, or they're an Apple design agency, for example, or they're using WordPress extensively already, then I'm still willing to have the conversation with them as to what it is that they want, because I'm always happy to help them at least clarify their decision making, or to guide them into how they can clarify their requirements, which they can then go on to take to other developers, if they want to adopt a different technology stack.
You mentioned API earlier, which is a bit jargony. What is an API, and what are the benefits of that, would you say?
So an API stands for an application programming interface. So these days, it typically is something like a web application in the same way as a website is. A website, though, is optimized for humans to use, and an API is designed for other computers to use. So it's for machine-to-machine communication rather than machine-to-human communication. So essentially, the benefit of having an API is that other people's computer systems can talk to your computer system. The API can then be used as a way to control how much information they use, when they can use it, and also what typically happens with APIs is that you can also control the users who have access to your data and your systems. So you may have heard of various APIs which, for example, will have a subscription sort of model. So some people will have a standard subscription, and some people might have a premium subscription. The standard subscription users can probably call the API maybe 1,000 times a day and get a certain amount of data, whereas the premium users can call it 1 million times a day with unlimited data. So those sort of levels of control you can build into it. And because you don't have to worry about the human-to-human or machine-to-human side of communication, it's essentially built for machines to communicate to each other. So their systems can call on your data and vice versa as well. So, and it makes the aggregation and analysis of data a lot more easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems to be more and more prevalent now, as if you look at something like Zero, for example, there's a number of pieces of software that use APIs to integrate with that, like cash flow forecasting software, et cetera, and ticketing or receipting software. So yeah, it's certainly something that, and again, looking at my system, there's certain automation that I want with third-party softwares like SMS messaging, for example, and looking at that, there's an API that my software developer can use to interface with that and automatically send out texts from my system rather than me manually going in and doing that right now. So we're recording this during, I guess, lockdown 3.0, for want of a better term, and that's been a big challenge for a lot of businesses. Outside of that, Daishik, in the number of years that you've been in business, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've faced?
For me, I guess I'm not really ashamed to say, me personally, I'm probably my biggest challenge.
Right.
Because I have introvert tendencies, and it doesn't make it easy for me to network and go out and push myself out there and do one-to-ones or even blow my trumpet on social media. So that's not to say I don't work well with people. I genuinely do, but it takes me a while to get to know them and build up that sort of a rapport. And the funny thing is that despite the common perception in the media and movies, software development isn't or it tends not to be a very lonely activity. It is actually quite people. It's quite people involved and creative process. You can't write anything, or get any requirements, or get any feedback without interacting with people, which I genuinely enjoy. It's just that initial step, and that's always a big challenge for me.
Well, you from my experience, you've done a great job doing that. You might have had to push yourself outside the comfort zone, but just coming on this, for example, I think you're a little bit reluctant to do this initially. So I'm glad. I'm glad I managed to cajole you into doing it.
No, thank you for that.
So you've kindly going to sort of like do a little bit of a solo thing now and sort of like share some of your advice. So what I'll do is I'll put you into just you on the screen, so it's focusing on you, and I'll just hand over to you, Daishik. The floor is yours.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you. Today I want to talk about KISS, not kissing, you'll be relieved to know, but keep it simple, stupid. So this applies not just to software, of course, but for my purpose as someone who runs a software business, I'm going to frame it in those terms. And the basic idea of KISS is that the simplest solution is frequently the best solution, and we should avoid unnecessary complexity. So what is KISS? Well, KISS is a problem-solving mindset. As a business owner or manager, you're not actually buying software, whether that is bespoke or not. What you're really trying to do is overcome a problem. So the first thing is to narrow down what it is that the issue really is. And once you have that, then you can start thinking about solutions. And KISS guides you to the minimal, simplest solution to the problem. And sometimes this leads to what is known as an MVP, or minimum viable product. And it's after you have dealt with that core solution that you can start thinking about extras. But this is where you need to be cautious, because this is where complexity starts to grow. And in general, you should only add complexity to your solution where it adds value. And that's often difficult to quantify, because the payoff for complexity can sometimes be in the future. So what is complexity? Well, to a certain extent, complexity, like beauty, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder. So what one person may see as complex is but a trifling detail to another. But essentially, anything that adds to the minimal, simplest solution to the given problem is a potential to add complexity to your solution. And in software in particular, this comes from two directions. The first one is feature bloat, what's sometimes called bloatware. And it comes from adding features and functionality that you simply won't use, or even if you occasionally do use it, the business value in having it in your bespoke package is questionable in terms of how it inflates the complexity of your software solution and therefore impacts on the cost of development and maintenance. The second thing which can add complexity to your software solution is excessive concern about future-proofing or anxiety about what-if scenarios. So what that means is that people get concerned and worried about how the software is going to box them in the future or fail to serve their needs as they perceive them in the future. So many software projects fail because they attempt to deliver on far too many what-if scenarios that may or may not materialize in the distant future, because by their very nature, future requirements are difficult to nail down. So it pays to take a realistic perspective on this. In the real world, although software can last almost indefinitely, most require some updates, maintenance, and sometimes even complete overhaul or rewrites. It may not seem obvious, but software has a lifespan. This won't necessarily be up to you as well, because it could be a change in regulations, new technology, an update in the operating system or browser, or a major hardware or software vendor upon which your solution depends goes bust. So depending on the type of business, it may be legitimate to worry about how your software will scale, say if your user count grows by a factor of 10 or 100 or more. But if this rate of growth isn't part of your business plan, then do you really need to architect in that kind of scalability? The problem with complexity is that whether you're driven by features or future-proofing, the result is almost the same. On the plus side, the software does more things, which may be great from your perspective, and it becomes more flexible and more adaptable to future changes. However, on the negative side, the solution then becomes more abstract, harder to understand and maintain. The overall solution gets more moving parts, all of which need to work together. And of course, the more components and the more code there is in there, the higher the probability that you will introduce, or your software developers, I should say, will introduce errors, and issues become harder to trace when they occur and cost more to fix. So, as you'd expect then, complex solutions are more costly to create and maintain. Obviously, sometimes complexity is necessary to meet the requirements, but always ask if you really need it or you just simply want it. So how can you avoid unnecessary complexity? Well, the first thing you need to do is obviously discuss your project with your software provider and discuss how features and requirements can be negotiated against your budget and resources. You need to build a dialogue with your software developer and software providers so you can pull each other back. And I mean pull each other back from overcomplicating the solution, because as a business owner, you probably want to have as many features as you can. As the software developer, they want to build as many of the requirements into the solution, as well as giving you the best architected solution. Not all of those things need to be in the final solution. I believe in using the Moscow mnemonic to ruthlessly prioritize both functional and non-functional requirements. For those of you who don't know, the word Moscow, if you drop the vowels, can be used to prioritize what it is that you want in your software. So the M signifies the must-haves. This is the core part of your minimum solution. Without it, you're not solving the problem. So you must have that. The S stands for should have. These would be supporting functions that you need to make the software easier or more efficient to use or maintain. From here on, when you're dealing with C and W, you could be adding unnecessary complexity. So the C stands for could have. Perhaps if time and budget allow and don't detract from the core solutions, you could perhaps introduce some other functionality. Perhaps you could introduce some future-proofing. The last one is W, and that's your would like to have, sometimes called the wish list. The features that you don't need right now, but could come in useful later, or which you would simply like. Obviously, the wish list is contingent on time, resource, cost, and your overall budget. The thing to remember also is that when you're doing a software project, that you should maintain a contingency budget for scenarios in the software development process that neither you nor the provider predicted. Finally, don't be tempted to do or get everything in one go. Sometimes a phased approach with a smaller budget and a smaller list of requirements may be better, and you can always revisit and add additional functionality later as and when your budget allows and also your requirements change. Sometimes, though, a good enough solution is actually simply good enough. So remember to KISS. And that, as Forrest Gump would say, is all I have to say about that.
Okay, thanks, Daishik. Some good advice there. I know in my experience of doing my software development and working with my developer is, I was, as I said earlier, I found it quite difficult to specify, and I'd specify certain things. The software developer would go, well, why are you doing it that way? Why don't you do it like this? And it was a much simpler solution and much more effective. And so it's quite useful, as you said, to work in partnership and get that advice. Because in my head, not being a software developer, how I might think the software does it, you will obviously experience and say, well, no, that's probably not the best way to do it. You can do it this way. And also what you touched on as well is certainly as time has gone on, as the software's evolved and we've added certain features, then that's something that, I create tickets now for future stuff. Because obviously, it needs to be within a budget. It needs to be sort of like manageable by the developer. You don't want to put too many features in all at once just to confuse the users. But yeah, it seems to be, on one level, it seems to be a never-ending goalpost because, the more and more I sort of look at my business and new things and stuff like that, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe software could help out with that. So it's back to the software developer sort of saying, can we put this in now? And of course, we'll have a discussion and we'll look at how sort of feasible that is to do, and just have a chat about how we can put it in with the existing software, because what you don't want to do is by putting something in, it's going to make something else not work correctly or go a little bit awry. So useful advice there, Daishik, so thanks for that.
I think it goes both ways as well, Paul, because like I think I alluded to in that little talk, is that it's sometimes software providers are as guilty of that as the people commissioning the software as well. So it's always important to ask within the layman's sort of discussion that you have with your software developers as to why are they trying to push you down a particular road or suggest a certain solution. Overestimated your requirements as well, and by you questioning them, you may get them to backtrack as well, and reduce complexity in that way. And the bottom line is, if they take something out, then you're essentially not paying for something, and you may end up getting your solution for less, and you may be able to then use that budget to put in something else, which you could bring up from your S or your C or your W on your Moscow priorities.
Well, we'll certainly strip some stuff out on the way as well, to simplify both the experience from the user as well as the software itself. So yeah, useful stuff. So one final thing then, if you were to give one top tip to any business owner out there, what would your top tip be?
My top tip is don't try and do everything in one go. Mm-hmm. Think of software as something which grows with your business. So start off with a small system. Make sure that the software developer you're working with understands that this is not the be all and end all, and that you will be asking for enhancements in the future. And so they architect just enough complexity into the system that you can add things later on, because nothing's worse than trying to do everything in one go. But the second worst thing is building a small system which doesn't then grow. So you need to hit that middle ground, and that you need to talk to your software provider about. And I think that's probably the way to go. Also, because technology moves remarkably quickly, even in the web space, web application space, what you don't want to do is blow your entire budget for the next 3 years or something on a package, which, you know, within a year and a half or 2 years starts to look dated. You know, you're far better having a system which evolves with time, which you can reskin, make it look more exciting, you know, or rebrand from time to time without having to go into the code and make expensive and time, you know, really time-consuming refactoring and adapting of the software.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Daishik. Well, thank you very much. Your ordeal is over now. You'll be pleased to hear. So,
thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks for your insights and the knowledge that you shared with us. I do appreciate that. And yeah, just thanks again for your time.